Hey folks, Philip here. Thanks for joining us for our post-draft review show. Before we get started, talking with Kevin over here, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button and help the channel grow. Put a lot of work into this past weekend, exhausted, but totally worth it. And it's been really exciting interacting with all these new fans and people that we got, in terms of attention on the project. So again, like and subscribe. Here you go. What's going on, people? We are back. The draft is done. Everything is settling up. So we're tired. It was a long weekend. 257 tweets for every pick. We did it live. We think it went okay, but it's weird. You don't really enjoy the draft. You don't have time. I think I looked up maybe 3 or 4 times the whole weekend. Every time Renegade played, I like jolted out of my chair. Because it was so loud. But that was it was a good learning experience. I think next year we're going to have a lot of our processes down. It's going to be a lot smoother, everything like that as we go through. And we're definitely going to start the draft component on depth view a lot earlier. Maybe get some more people on board and really do a lot of profiles. But it was a crazy weekend, man. It was a lot of. I think the word of the week was consensus. We're not gonna get into anything there, but that was probably the word of the week. But let's kind of get into it. So right now you'll be able to see on the screen graph. Okay, so this graph is kind of why we do everything and is really important. So what you'll see here in that plus minus column is which team rosters got the best this weekend from Thursday morning till Saturday evening. Which teams got the best through the NFL draft, okay? And there's one clear winner for me and our data, because the gap between 1 and 2 is huge. The Las Vegas Raiders went nuts, going 2.5 better. So I think they had a great draft with Mendoza. They had a lot of our guys, Kev. Stukes, Crawford were the next 2 picks. After first, and then Trey Zune was really high on our board. I don't know if you remember that, but Trey Zune was like wildly in top 40 player on the board. They get him, slotted him at left guard. Mike Washington Jr., one of your guys, Dalton Johnson, and then undrafted, Kev. I don't know if you took an eye on it, but Roman Hemby and Chase Roberts both went there.
Yeah, I saw that with both of them. Yeah, Hemby's reuniting with Mendoza, and Chase Roberts is a nice little find. I think obviously he didn't test great. We talked about him before, but could potentially, if things align, could be on that Jake Bobo depth receiver type track. So yeah, they did a great job.
I love that draft. Yeah, it felt like John Spytek was watching our shows, because not because we're smart or anything, just because a lot of the guys we've been pumping up and that we liked were guys they took. And that Jermod McCoy pick, that could go nuts if he's healthy, right? Just let Darian Porter play this year, or let him battle with Hezekiah Masses if McCoy can't play. And then next year you're going to have a freak if he's coming back healthy, which seems to be the case. We're not doctors, right? But that seems to be the case. Is he's just going to probably need maybe a year off to fix that knee one more time. But like the Twitter doctors all say that it's a procedure that's fairly common, and then afterwards you're back to 100% type of thing. So
yeah, I'm hoping he can be healthy. Obviously, he's so young, he's so talented. I mean, it's one of those things where the risk reward type thing. Once you get to the 4th round, you're on day 3. If you burn a 4th round pick on a guy who never plays, let's say worst case scenario happens, you can go to sleep at night and say look, we tried. It's worth the roll of the dice. Because if he does end up hitting, I mean, obviously he's a tremendous player physically and so talented. So totally worth the roll of the dice there at the top of the 4th round. So hopefully for him and for the Raiders' sake, it works out.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, on this chart, I want to reiterate, the highest grades don't necessarily mean it was the best class. What it means is those teams specifically upgraded the most at positions of need. So if you're looking at this chart and your team's towards the bottom, don't get pissed off, because that's actually a good thing. That means your team had very little holes to begin with and your roster is quite strong. And you'll kind of see that correlation in terms of the teams that are on the weaker end of the pendulum had the greatest rise, because they had the greatest room for improvement. So you'll see the Rams barely did anything, and that's kind of what you get when you take a quarterback of the future, when Matt Stafford might play a couple more years. What do you think about Ty Simpson and everything?
Yeah, I get it from both ends of this perspective. Obviously, I'm not personally the biggest fan of Ty Simpson. So, but we talked about on the show briefly before, on one of the shows previously, just how like if I was Ty Simpson or his parents, his agent, like I'd be praying that he ended up in LA, and he did. This is the perfect situation for him. He's going to be able to sit for a couple years, 1 or 2 years at least, probably behind Stafford. Gets to be with McVay. It's a obviously a tremendous culture, locker room, coaching staff, all that good stuff. So if he doesn't end up hitting there when his time is, when it ends up coming when Stafford's done, it's not going to be because of, he was in a crappy situation. Like a lot of young quarterbacks end up failing because of, they're not put in a good spot. So it's ultimately probably the best spot for him. I get it if you're the Rams, in the sense that like, hey, we're probably not going to be picking up here again. They've had a history of trading away first round picks in the past, in previous iterations. So, they might not get a chance to draft a quarterback in the first round that they like anytime soon, if ever. And if they liked him, they liked him. It's one of those things also on the opposite end where, you're trying to win now. You've got a quarterback who's probably got another 1 or 2 years left in him. You want to maximize it. So I get the argument for taking a Mekhi Lemon or taking someone like that could help you now. So I get it. I mean, time will tell. Obviously, if Ty Simpson ends up being really good and being the long-term solution for them after Stafford,
Yeah.
no one cares. So
yeah, because right now, like looking at the depth chart, Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, they drafted C.J. Daniels, who's a nice player. I like
yeah,
C.J.
I
Daniels.
liked him.
Good boundary player, but you're looking at if you're looking at Daniels and Devontae having to start on the outside with Puka doing a lot of that in the middle of the field slot work because the next receiver is Jordy Whittington, who's a fine receiver, but like let's not get it twisted. He's not like a bona fide NFL like guy that's going to move the needle for you guys. And after that, they went with like a fifth tight end in Max Clare. They're just building a tight end army in LA, like Dumbledore's army in LA. Keegan Trow is probably going to be a guard. And then they took a backup nose tackle to Poona Ford and Tim Keenan the third. So it was just like a very lackluster draft. Didn't really move the needle much. And then undrafted free agency, not really much that screams out. Like Nikhai Hill-Green, I think that's probably the most recognizable player, the Alabama linebacker. So that's probably why they're the lowest on the list. But kind of going back to the top, like Miami Dolphins, I thought they did a really good job for John Eric Sullivan and Halfley. I thought that was a good culture building draft. Just for a quick recap for people, Caden Proctor, Chris Johnson, who was one of our guys, Jacob Rodriguez, who was one of our guys back to back. That was wild. Chris Bell ends up going 94, Kev. I don't think either of us saw that coming. And then they get a coverage linebacker in Kyle Lewis. Michael Taft's a player we kind of liked, right? Good culture guy. He might end up starting. Max Llewellyn's a guy we really liked. Played 95% of his snaps at left defensive end for Iowa. And then I don't know if you saw, but check this out for undrafted free agency. Mason Reiger, one of our guys. Renee Conga, Toolsy 3. Lewis Moore, captain type safety on Indiana. And Le'Veon Moss, one of your guys, a running
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, I think the beauty of it when you're a team that's rebuilding, I mean, we've seen teams in the past that have been these types of teams that they're kind of tear it down to the studs. It's a blank slate. You're super attractive to undrafted players that are coming in because they're going to get an opportunity to legitimately, if not even just make the team, they might get a chance to like be in the rotation or, depending on what position they are, things like that. So, I mean, they kind of look at it and are like, well, I mean, how many players are actually entrenched on the 53-man roster going into the offseason? I don't know, who knows in Miami, but there's a lot more spots up for competition than there are. So it's a good thing for them. They got a lot of really interesting players. A guy like Rieger probably went undrafted just because of the medicals.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So that's probably what it is. Le'Veon Moss was a guy who was hurt a lot last year, just had the nagging stuff and has his own deficiencies, but he's a talented ball carrier. So like he might end up being able to stick there. So it's probably a pretty good, starting point for the new John Eric Sullivan and
Yeah.
Jeff Halfley duo.
Yeah, I'm trying to wonder if maybe like Jordan Brooks becomes a trade candidate now because they took Rodriguez and Kyle Lewis, right? So, old regime guy in the last year of his deal. Maybe you can get a fifth, sixth round pick back because he's like led the league in tackles pretty much the last couple of years in Miami. So a team that's still missing their Mike linebacker, that could be a really good patch, something that might be really attractive. But I really liked what they did. Kind of going back down to the bottom of the spectrum again. That's what we don't want to do just the top and forget everybody else. But looking at a team like Denver, right? Going over to kind of what they did. They took one of your guys, Tyler Onidim, immediate starter. Jonah Coleman, another guy we like. Cage Casey, I understand, is going to be kicked inside to left guard and battle with Ben Powers. Justin Jolie, Dallin Bentley, two tight ends. And then Red Murdoch, Mr. Irrelevant, at that inside linebacker spot. Could compete with Justin Sternad for a starting job at inside linebacker. So, again, one of those things, like we look at this, and it's a nice draft, right? Like there's really not players that were like, gross. But Denver, your team is so good already that like anybody that's slotting in is going to be almost impossible to have as a starter because you're set at almost every single starter position on the team. So Anya Deem was pretty much the only starter. And it sounds like that was someone they targeted, and that was one of your guys, Kev.
I thought they did a good job getting the players they did. And honestly, like we see this all the time with these teams that are really good. And this is honestly where you want to be, obviously. You want to be a good team that when you draft guys, even in the second, third, fourth round, like, you're not asking them to come in and be instant impact guys. Hopefully, they can be a guy, maybe they're a healthy scratch on game day because they just have so many players in front of them. Or maybe they're just special teamers and they get a chance to play a little bit, but they're just role guys. And then by year 2, year 3, now they've got the keys of the car. They're the starter, whatever position they play, things like that. And then you kind of keep it going because guys are going to walk in free agency, guys are going to get traded, guys are going to get hurt. And then you just have the conveyor belt going. I mean, that's what the good franchises do. And that seems like what I think Denver's doing. I know Sean Payton's always talked about getting the Joker and all that. And they had Evan Ingram, who they brought in last year. Justin Jolie could be that type of
He
guy.
could,
I thought,
yeah.
We saw the run on tight ends happen there, in the late 2 into the third round. There were guys that were still left, but a lot of them were guys that were just the pass catcher. I mean, Michael Trigg went undrafted.
Bad
Guys like
attitude guy, that's what will
yeah.
get you.
So then, Justin Jolie and Koziel, who went to the Jaguars in the 5th round. These are guys that are they're pass catchers. A guy like Josh Cuevas went in the 5th round, and he's really mostly known for his physicality and as a blocker. So like tight ends were really pushed up a lot. You saw in the 3rd round, but there were some guys that were just like they're just one-trick ponies or pass catchers. They fell a little bit, but Denver ended up getting, I think, a good value there with Jolie.
Yeah, and just want to say, I had Jolie to the Broncos in my 7-round mock, so I don't know.
Called
Bro,
it.
this is pretty good. Everything else might have been nonsense, but I got one right, so I'll take that where I can get it. The New Orleans Saints. I wanna talk about the Saints a little bit because Kev, over the weekend we invited a lot of new people into our ecosystem. We gained a lot of new followers on social media on X, and we welcome all of you. We hope you come and stay around for a while. But the Saints are a franchise and a fan base that we gained particular traction with and have had a lot of like nice, good conversations with Saints fans. So shout out to Saints fans. You guys have been really cool to interact with so far. And I shouted you out because I think you guys really did well with that draft class. Quick review, Jordan Tyson, stay healthy in New Orleans. I thought that was a great landing spot for him. Kristen Miller, nose tackle, helping that run defense. Oscar Delp's a guy we loved, right? They have 2 kind of finesse tight ends in Juwan Johnson, Noah Fant. They needed somebody that can put their face in the fan and move people around while still being a great athlete. Bryce Lance was another pick that I liked. Now you can move Olave, and if you guys go to our depth chart, you'll see Chris Olave in that second Z wide receiver slot. I just want to make it abundantly clear because he's under Bryce Lance in our system and in our slotting. That second Z receiver is the starting slot. Okay, so it's not. Don't panic that Bryce Lance is higher on the actual depth chart over Chris Olave. That's just how we structure things on depth because we only have so much space that we could put stuff in that regard. But now you can really take advantage of Chris Olave, Kev. Put him in the slot, move people around because Bryce Lance is that long, deep ball kind of guy. And then they got some speed of Lorenzo Styles Jr. And Barry Brown was the guy we talked about a little bit as a return specialist that they badly needed. The only thing that I kind of thought they missed out is they really didn't get a nickel corner. I thought Chandler Rivers was there a few times. I thought that would have been a perfect solution for them. But what'd you think about the Chiefs kind of rebuilt this whole offseason?
I think when you look at a team that has a young quarterback or hopes that they have their long-term solution, right? We talked about the Giants before, and you look at the Saints, obviously Titans, teams that got their guy last year, and then look what the Saints did. I mean, they had other needs. They could have taken Delane, obviously got jumped. The Chiefs came up and jumped them. Maybe they were afraid that the Saints were going to actually pull the trigger there. But to get Jordan Tyson, who God willing, he stays healthy and all that. I mean, he is a tremendous talent. I mean, he will be a great asset for any quarterback now with Tyler Shuck. But I think it's a good thing for a franchise to basically say, look, we don't know for sure that Shuck is the guy. We hope he is. Obviously, he showed some really good things down the stretch, and there's a good chance that he is the long-term guy there, at least for the the next foreseeable future. But you got to give him every tool that you can to make sure that if
They've helped them immensely.
yeah, like you don't want to fail him before he can fail himself on the field. Like you want to make sure he's got the toys he needs. And now having Olave already, put ETN in the backfield, like they did already in free agency. Getting Delp, obviously, with Tyson in there. Like, Delp's a guy that, really good value. He was a part of that tight end run that went into the early third round. A guy who, really honestly didn't get a ton of production at Georgia. And that was a big question. Like, why is a guy this talented and this much pedigree as a recruit isn't producing? And, maybe that was the offense at Georgia, possibly.
Yeah.
Who knows? But he's one of those guys. We see it all the time. Tight ends come to the NFL and they end up having more production than they did in college. He could absolutely be one of those guys. I thought that was a really good pick.
Yeah, 100%. And you look at their wide receiver room now: Jordan Tyson, Chris Olave, Bryce Lance, Devon Vele, Barian Brown, Trey Palmer. Like, that's a big renovation to what they had. That's like a term you like to use. That's killing it with fire. Like, let's get this thing fixed. And I really like what they did. So shout out to Saints. I thought you guys have had a great offseason in general. 1,000%. So let's move now to a little bit of a controversial team, and that would be Duval's finest, the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of people kind of getting upset with the approach for young James Gladstone in terms of moving off. Not a lot of names that really get you excited in terms of, if you are the type of person that's, consuming a lot of this draft material, the whole cycle, everything like that, putting your due diligence in on your end, not necessarily a bunch of names that are gonna get you standing out of your seat. But when you do your diligence on these types of players that they targeted, they're really intriguing people for the roles that they're being brought in to compete for. I think that's the best way to say it. I love the Emmanuel Pregnon pick. If he doesn't start at right guard right away, that's Ezra Cleveland's in the last year of his deal. You're slotting him right there. Ideally, with an older player like that, Kev, I would hope that they could win the job, right? It's not like he's a 21-year-old that's still needing to develop strength. He's already a grown-ass man, like at 25 years old. So go in there and win that job, young buck. Even if he doesn't, Nate Borkercher, Tanner Koziel, you mentioned earlier, very niche for their role and how the Jags are going to plan to use them. Josh Cameron, receiver with return ability, that we talked a long time, all cycle offline, that this is a guy they'll probably target. And lo and behold, they did. And Jalen Husky got probably a couple screws loose and seeing some of his content. And I like that, because I don't need every single player to be buttoned up to the nines in that regard. And then intrigue. Parker Hughes, 4.39 40. Albert Regis, a 295 nose tackle. That's kind of wild and weird, but high effort player. Wesley Williams, 5 blocked kicks. And that's got to be a role. Side note, imagine they bring Calais back for a year, how many blocked kicks they'll have between the two of them. That'd be pretty nice to see, Jags. If you're listening, that would be nice. And then undrafted, they went nuts too. Devin Marshall, Jamari Taylor, running back, Joey Aguilar, camp arm at least, quarterback. We liked him during the season. I know I've rambled a bit about the Jags, but just kind of letting people understand what the class was and who they brought in. What's your take on it, Kev?
Yeah, I think, not to go too deep in the weeds on the whole consensus argument that's out there, but I think what the people miss when they talk about the consensus being the important thing, it's fun to look at. It's interesting. It kind of puts it all very buttoned up for people to consume. So there's nothing wrong with it. But the problem is, it doesn't, like you talked about, it doesn't actually go through every team what they're actually looking for putting in their building. Because every team's got different needs, different cultures, different scheme fits.
Different roster spots available.
Yeah.
Everything's some team
different.
might only have 6 spots, and they need specific people at that spot.
Right. And when you have a specific thing you're looking for, and I think if you look through, I would ask every single fan of every single team, go through, kind of try to find a commonality between all the players in terms of their mindset, their backgrounds, just like look for buzzwords that you see in scouting reports or hear the coaches talk about: rugged, physical, violent, all those types of things. You'll see a lot of times, most of the time, teams are looking for commonalities. They're looking for threads. That certainly was the case with the Jaguars. They look for violent dudes, guys that play with their hair on fire, guys that have motors that don't stop. The one guy they talked about is a little bit different. It was, Koziel, who's not really a blocker, but this is what happens, not, Jaguars in particular on this example, but, you talk about teams like the Ravens, Lions, Steelers, or whatever. But when you have a culture that's built a certain way and you have a player that comes in who maybe is kind of a weak in that area where, physicality is, demanded on those guys, for the Jaguars in particular with Koziel, he's going to walk in the door. He's going to see Brenton Strange, Workers are blocking like maniacs because that's what they do. Richard Angulo, who's the position coach, who was a longtime player in the league, was a blocker. That's what his role was. Liam Cohen and Brian Pacucci and all those guys, they're going to emphasize blocking nonstop. So if he doesn't block, he's not going to play.
That's right.
So they're kind of bullying players. That's what the culture does. They make these players be better than and what they were previously. So they had a lot of commonalities between the guys they looked for. Time will tell on the Jaguars and every other team if they're going to end up being good draft picks and good classes as a whole. I think people can settle down on the whole consensus stuff because it's every team's unique. But I think when you look at it, they clearly had a vision. Time will tell if it ends up playing out well.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think, Kev, what kind of compounded it for maybe some Jags fans and stuff like that is it's like that Squidward meme when you're looking out the window and everybody else is having fun, because I say that because like the Colts are number 4 on this graph, plus 1.44 roster grade upgrade. The Titans, number 7, 1.16 roster upgrade. And then the Texans, maybe not as much, 0.31, but they added some bullies. They certainly did. To that room, right? Um, you know, I wanted to highlight those teams specifically because like the Colts kept doing well every pick, and I'm like, this is nuts. Like CJ Allen, they had a huge hole at middle linebacker. They bring in CJ Allen, right? Bryce Betcher's another guy we like, right? Now they got 2 gritty linebackers when they had no one going on there. They had John Bullock in a dream, before that. They'd take AJ Halsey, a decapitator, strong safety. Now you got somebody now Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be, really thinking twice going over the middle or whoever's operating Jacoby Myers over there, for example. Caden Curry, a player I loved, adding to that edge room. Deion Burks getting him at 254. Like, what happened there? Did he murder someone? That was crazy to me. So, like, you see that draft class, it's a really good haul looking at them. Moving over to the Texans really quickly, like Keelan Rutledge, Cade McDonald, Marlon Klein, again, kind of mirroring what the Jags are doing and getting those physically imposing this is going to be a black and blue division this year. That's without a doubt. Wade Wood has another type of those players, and then capping it like an Aiden Fisher. You're getting a lot of grit in that class. And kind of surprised everybody with Carnell Tate, but again, we talked about it earlier in the show, helping incubate that young quarterback and giving Cam Ward the best chance to succeed. And then going ahead, adding Anthony Hill Jr., a player that was really popular, a high upside player in Keldrick Falk, who fits that Robert Saleh system like a glove at strong side defensive end. Nick Singleton's a good running back. Pat Coogan going that late, I thought it was a great selection for them. He could start at center day one. Like, he's that type of guy. So I kind of go to that because, like, if you are the Jag fan and then you're looking at the other teams doing kind of these I want to say sexier picks, right? It could be a little bit demoralizing, but, I would encourage Duval to just simmer down and just wait till we get to camp and see what's going on with everything.
Yeah. And I think for people that do look at the Colts, and I don't disagree with you. I think the Colts on paper, it looks like they did a good job. I feel like ever since Chris Ballard's been there, we always talk about the Colts having really good draft classes.
That's a good point.
They don't have a single division title since he's been there. So
that's a good point.
Like, we don't know anything. And just because a draft class looks good on paper doesn't mean that the team is destined for a Super Bowl or a dynasty, to come. So we don't know. I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, the teams don't know. I mean, they have ideas. They do all the homework. They do this for a living. They hope they're right, and they're going to be right on some. They're not going to be right on others. But we certainly don't know. We don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately. So we can praise all these teams all we want. I mean, people were praising Joe Douglas for years with the Jets. What did they win when he was there? Nothing. People, obviously, the old example on the opposite end is, that Seahawks draft with Russell Wilson back in 2012. Mm-hmm. Everyone talked about that draft class being terrible, and that was kind of like a launching pad to a little mini dynasty that they had, a little run there. They were a great team for several years. So, and got 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 ring out of it. So, but yeah, and the Titans I think did a good thing too. I mean, they did a lot of good things in that class. I mean, Carnell Tate, like you said, was a little weird, but he's a good player. They're trying
they just wanted a steady, composed guy. He was the most, down the fairway.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. I totally understand the vision. But again, the Titans are one of those teams that had a lot of issues. I mean, they're picking, at the top of the draft the last few years now. So they really had to make sure that they, got a lot of good players, and they had a lot of spots to fill. So, I mean, they were going to get guys that are going to make them a better team just by nature. I mean, their floor was a lot lower than a lot of these other teams. And then, like you said, we talked about the commonalities between players real quick. We talked about the Jaguars, what they were looking for. Texans, like you said, same thing. They're looking for the same type of guy that fits their building. It doesn't matter if a player is a good fit for someone else. If he doesn't fit the Texans, the Jaguars, the Rams, whatever, can't play there. So totally respect the vision.
You also have to build geared towards your division, right? The Jags' #1 run defense in the NFL last year. So now you get Keelan Rutledge. Now you get Wyatt Teller. All these things. You're trying to do you get a good blocking tight end, Marlon Klein. Like, you have to adjust. Everything's a game of chess. You know, one team does one move, you have to build to kind of combat that strength. Otherwise, you're going to get mauled, you know, if there's too big of an abyss or a chasm between those. Those are like and we're going to keep this show a little bit shorter for you guys. I know the last two have been a little long, but we're probably going to wrap up on this. So we talked a little bit about teams on both sides of that pendulum, right? The small and then the top. Is there any class kind of in that middle that might be interesting to you? I'll start while you take a look at it, but I thought the Dallas Cowboys had a really good draft, personally. Getting Caleb Downs was exactly what the doctor ordered. That might have been my favorite pick in that draft. Christian Parker, secondary DB guy by trade, coming in. And the secondary was the worst unit maybe in the NFL. Like, they were so bad in the back end last year. They desperately needed a field general, and they got one in Caleb Downs. And then they got that speed rusher we both really liked. And you were right, Kev. Malachi Lawrence went very early. You know, yeah, I was listening even to some pods. I forget who it was, but they still had Malachi Lawrence in like the 40-50 range because they didn't believe, they thought he was a combine wonder. But I think that was a very real ascension that we forecasted there. Jayshon Barham, you know, that could be a really interesting player, strong
Tone
side
setter.
linebacker, tone setter. Picture them using him a lot like the Eagles used Jalix Hunt. That's where Christian Parker came from. Kind of that roamer that just makes plays all everywhere. Drew Shelton, swing tackle. They needed a swing tackle for forever. Devin Moore, a really interesting developmental cornerback in case Siobhan Ravel doesn't take that next step. And then LT Overton's that really good depth piece for Rashawn Gary to give him a blow when he has to come out. That strong side kind of built edge. And then the last pick, Anthony Smith. I just don't know much about him. I just know it's a really big, tall receiver from East Carolina. And then Michael Trigg and DJ Rogers, two tight ends in undrafted free agency that we alluded to earlier in the show. So that's kind of my pick for the Cowboys. What about you? Any team that stands out?
Yeah, there was one that kind of stood out just because it got a lot of my players that I felt like were kind of interesting. But that was the Bears down there, you know, kind of right there in that middle third. But I thought Thieneman's just a good player, you know, and he goes at 25 when I think most mocks had him in that 12 to 18 range. He slides a little bit because Minnesota goes defensive tackle there instead of taking Thieneman, and he falls into their lap. So they get a good player to replace Kevin Byard. And again, they were not very good on defense last year. So adding him, a young player, into the mix, I think that'll be a good player for them. Logan Jones, just a rock solid. I mean, those Iowa centers, I mean, they come in, they're pro ready. And that was huge too. I mean, just to replace Drew Dahlman, who ends up unexpectedly retiring. But and then that tight end run happens, and you had that late second into the third with Sam Roush, and obviously they've already got, you know, Colston Loveland, they've got Komet. This is what the league has done. We saw what McVay did last year with all these tight ends.
That's a
Teams are
nasty
trying to
three tight
copy.
end set.
Yeah.
That's
So
a
now
nasty one.
the more tight ends you can throw out there, the harder it is for defense to decipher what's coming at him, run or pass. And Roush is a good player. You know, I don't know, you know, ultimately what his ceiling is and all that, but he's going to be a good pro for a long time. He can block, and we had some drops at times, but like he's got natural hands, good enough athlete, tested well. I was a fan of his. And then to get some speed in there with Xavier Thomas, Malik Muhammad, I thought was a good pick in the 4th round for depth at corner. Keyshawn Elliott was a guy I was personally very high on in the 5th round. So getting him, like, I think bare minimum, he's going to be a tone setter on special teams.
I think he's going to start, Kev, because
He could.
TJ Edwards had that gnarly injury at the end of the season. So I don't think he'll be ready for week 1. So, you know, if he's looking good, he might win that spot at least until TJ Edwards is 100%. They don't have to rush him.
Yeah, he's the type of guy I like a lot just because he's got all the mental stuff. He's a team leader, team captain. You know what you're getting out of him every single day he walks in the building. He's physical, violent, hits people, struggles a little bit in coverage, but, you know, he is a good enough athlete where you hope that, you know, in time that can improve. And then their last pick, I mean, just taking a guy with all the traits there in the 6th round with Jordan Vandenberg. I mean,
Such a
at
Dennis
that point,
Allen defensive tackle, man.
just you take an athletic guy like that
Yeah.
who's got a lot of traits, and you hope that it hits with Dennis Allen and Jeremy Garrett there coaching him up. But I thought they hit on a lot of guys that I feel like will at least stick in the league for a number of years. So I thought they did a good job.
Yeah, and even Xavier Thomas, like, you know, he's probably not going to really get in that receiver rotation, but that's, again, a role niche player in terms of a really fast guy that might return some kicks for you now. So, and like looking at the depth chart, they really didn't address receiver well. They did do the Xavier Thomas pick, but you look at it because of that Sam Roush pick now, you could use Colston Loveland as a power slot, and that's that's a mismatch nightmare now with Odunze, Burden. Now you got to cover this Clydesdale in the slot. Like, that's a bad situation. And then I would be remiss not to mention another one of your guys going to them and undrafted in Caden Barnett, which can be the long-term solution for Joe Tooney. He's not going to play forever. You could just crock pot him and let him learn from the protector of the year in the NFL.
I'm surprised a guy like that, I know he's a guard, not a premium position, but I'm surprised a guy like that went undrafted because I don't know, again, like we don't know what he does in an interview room with these teams. We don't know the medicals. We don't know
He
all
could
the
have been wearing
background.
face paint during an interview. Like, we
You're
don't
right.
know.
Like, that's the stuff that the people that make boards that go in the consent, we don't know. So, but he goes undrafted, just getting him from what we do know, an athletic guy who just mauls. Like, he is out to play football an old school way. That's the type of guard I would like to have in my building. We'll see. I mean, he's going to have an opportunity there in Chicago. Hopefully for him and for the Bears, he ends up sticking. But totally a type of player I want in my building just to see what I got there. So yeah, I mean, they had a great year last year. A lot of close wins, obviously, the regression to the mean, could happen where, you're not going to get the ball to bounce your way all the time like that. So who knows? But I thought they set themselves up and did a nice job to try to continue what they did last year.
1,000%. Yeah. I also really like their class as it was unfurling live. I was like, man, Ryan Poles is really getting this thing done right now. And they're going to be a strong competitor in that division. Like, Packers didn't do much. I thought Lions did well. Like, they got much better this offseason, but Packers didn't really move the needle much. They kind of stayed stagnant. Lost Romeo Dobbs, didn't really replace much in that regard. And yeah, so good stuff, man. So that's pretty much it. We promised you guys a little bit of a shorter episode, just kind of letting the dust settle and sifting through some of this draft chaos. But that's puts a cap on draft season, hashtag draft season, and we're gonna get started on next year. Here and putting together loose boards and stuff like that in the near future. But I appreciate you guys as always for listening and tuning in, and I hope you're enjoying the conversations and. Just plans for the summer. I think we're going to be doing like a summer series where we'll have a guest from each team. I'll sit down with somebody from each team, a contributor from each team, and kind of just do like a depth chart review with them and talk about some players, see who we might be a little low on, high on, etc. in the grading. But I think that's going to be really cool. So make sure you're subscribing and following along. And welcome to everyone new that's joining us on our adventure here with this project. Until then, Kev, see you later.